All right, and I am live. Happy Cinco de Mayo. So, I've got a new theory I want to share and get your input on. So today, I picked up my dad. He's older, retired. Um, Take him out to breakfast. Very slow going, and I'm looking around, and a lot of old people eating. Right, a lot of gray hair, and I'm like, okay, I didn't think much of it. Then I'm like, okay, we got to go to the DMV now. So I drive him up to the DMV. We've got to do some title registration on one of his trucks, and I'm selling one of his trucks. It's just don't need to carry the insurance on it. So we go to the DMV. We stand in line, and everybody's old, like sea of gray hair, and things are moving really slow, really slow. I'm like, okay. I said, well, we got to run by the store. I need to pick up some wiring. We got to finish a project you started in your garage. So why don't you come to the store with me? So we go into the store, and it was, it just really hit me then. There were lots of old people walking with carts, and you go down the aisle. One person on this side stops and looks at the shelf, and then another person, completely oblivious, stops on the other side and looks at that shelf, blocks all the traffic coming through. And I'm like, okay, they're obviously retired. They have no sense of urgency, no sense of time. And it just everywhere I look, this is a home improvement store. It's Monday morning or Monday afternoon. You'd think tradespeople would be coming in here to, look for materials. And, they probably did the morning rush. That's usually when I'm in there. But middle of the day, it was just a sea of gray hair and all buying home improvement stuff. The old ladies in their gardening, they got all their flower pots and all getting all ready for spring. And the guys have their, I don't know, whatever they're getting. And, no major projects, but it just, I just thought what the purchasing power is of that generation. I say that generation, it's the baby boomers and the silent generation. Silent generation's getting pretty old. They're purchasing. They're towards the end of their spending years. But the baby boomers are just entering in their retirement years and spending. And man, can they spend. Holy cow. So here's my thought, my theory. Where did I just put my notes? So just some quick stats. 73% of all the wealth in the United States is held by people 55 and older. And then over half of that wealth in the United States is held by people over 65. So you're talking 50% of the consumer spending money and wealth is held by retired people. And hang on a second. I got Aaron calling me live. Bear with me. I'll embarrass him. Maybe he'll jump on. Anyhow, so they've got all this spending power. And can we go into a recession if you have 70% or over 50% of the wealth in that retired generation? They don't need the income. Can we go into a recession? Are they going to lose their jobs? No. Are they going to be fearful of their jobs? No. What would trigger them not to spend? So that's kind of my theory. Sure, the stock market could go down and they could freak out for a little bit, but they've got the wealth in a lot of different ways. They get the Social Security, they get all the other stuff. Maybe Doge could cut their Social Security and send us into a recession. But if you got 50 to 73% of the purchasing power of the wealth in this country by retired people, I mean, where are you going to put your resources now? I mean, you're a young man. You're going to enter the job force. Where are they going to spend their money? That's where you're going to make money. That's how you'll get rich, is provide the services they need. So that kind of hit me. So the first thing that hit me is, with that kind of spending power, we're not going to go into any sort of deep recession because they're going to spend our way out of it. Two is we can build an economy based off of that wealth. So all the goods and services are going to chase that wealth. So how do you position yourself to go after that wealth? How do you provide services to that demographic? It doesn't pay to work for poor people, right? You need someone that can pay the bills and, pay you for your services. So I did just kind of a quick AI search. So housing, food, groceries, healthcare, health, wellness, household stuff, clothing. Those are all kind of the major expenses for people. Home improvement and maintenance, and that's what I saw today at the home improvement store. They want to do the home improvements. They want nice things. They like shiny objects. They always have. They grew up on commercials. They are the consumer generation. Um, the younger generation, they're not really influenced by TV commercials or anything like that. They're immune to it because they've been inundated with it and they don't buy into it. But that older generation, they bought into it. So as my generation kind of half bought into it. But anyhow, so they're going to spend all that money and on home improvement, on their household, on their food, and then they'll spend it on travel and leisure, also personal care and electronics. But at the home improvement, they don't have the physical ability to do what they want to do. I mean, they do right now, but they're not going to that long. Once you start getting 65, some are going to stay healthy into 75, and maybe a few will stay healthy into their 80s. But in the next 10, 20 years, they're not going to be able to physically do what they want to do. They want to do the gardening. They want nice things. They want the pretty lawn. They're going to want, the sidewalk shoveled, the driveway shoveled. They're going to need maintenance on the house. They're going to need painting done. They're going to need gutters cleaned. They're going to need windows washed. They're going to need all sorts of services. They're going to need routine maintenance, carrying salt down to the water softener. They're going to need just even changing furnace filters, um, just the routine items that come with the house that just come up every day that need to be taken care of. They need handymen, and I think there's going to be a big market for that. And not everyone in that generation can afford it, but a lot of them can with that kind of wealth. And then if you target just some sort of maintenance business to keep them in that house long enough, because that's what they enjoy. They enjoy traveling, maybe a service that you can maintain it, so they don't have to go to association living. They can travel, come back, and everything's taken care of for them in the meantime. Monthly service fee, that kind of thing. So there's tremendous opportunity as the whole economy is shifting. It's shifting in a couple ways. One is from Trump dealing with refinancing. What do we have? 70% of our debt that is about to reset. So we got to cut spending. We got to raise revenue just to cut that budget. We could get killed. So a lot of things are changing with tariffs and everything else. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. But just the general consumerism as this wave of boomers retire, the whole economy is shifting. We're not shifting into the daily commute and the hustle and bustle. We're going into like a retirement community. You start looking around, everybody's old. Everybody is old, even myself. You look at pictures from the 50s, 60s, 70s. Everybody's young, healthy, skinny. Now everybody's fat and old. It's the way things are. So we got to adapt to this changing market. So how do you position yourself to this changing market? Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Anyhow, so how do you position yourself to change? It's what goods and services are they going to need? What can you provide for them? How can you position yourself? They're going to need assistance the older they get. Right now, they're young and healthy. I guess they play a lot of that pickleball. So I don't know if you sell pickleball equipment or anything like that. They want conveniences. They want easy. They want shiny objects. They are the consumerism. They are the definition of what made Americans consumers. That generation created the definition of why we're consumerism. So that's how you have to target that demographic. And then where we go from there, that's going to be 20 years down the road. Then that shifts again. And then the millennials are going to be the largest consumers, the largest population to service. But right now, everything is going to end up being geared towards the boomers in retirement. So I got a question from Robert. How would that apply to those who are house rich? I post this. How would that apply to those who are house rich but cash poor with a housing reset? Some markets are reporting drops in value. Grandpa has to sell a house for a loss because they can't keep up with maintenance, taxes, HOA fees, and stuff. Um, I don't think that's going to happen. The millennial generation is bigger than the boomer generation, and then you combine the millennial generation with Gen Y that's starting to become of age and enter the workforce, and will be entering into the home buying process in the next 10 years. If all the boomers died at once, yeah, we might have a shock to the system, but they're going to die off over the years. So it's not big enough to create that housing crisis that everyone predicts. There are some markets that got a little overheated and overbuilt. That demand has been crushed temporarily. The demographics are still there, but with the high rates, that demand is squashed for now. So that those markets will balance out eventually. There's going to be some opportunity to buy in, but overall, I don't see the house prices coming down. And the main reason I say that is I kind of compare it to the early '80s during um, the apparently Gen Y is a millennial generation. What's the generation after millennials then? Gen Z. Oh yeah, it is Gen Z. Thanks. What do I know? Okay, so where was I? The early '80s, the boomers were coming out, right? They were entering the job market, huge wave of population coming in, kind of oversaturated the workforce. They had spent a ton of money on the Great Society, right? The 1960s, they pumped all this money into the Great Society, the welfare state, and all this housing, and the government housing subsidies, and then they spent a ton on the Vietnam War for that lasted whatever 14 years. And the young boomer men went through the Vietnam War, and then they came out and they entered a job market, and inflation reared its ugly head. Right, 71 we went off the gold standard, so inflation took off. And then we had inflation, and then we had slow job growth, right? So you had what they call stagflation. So we had to crush inflation, and then Paul Volcker, the Volcker recession, jacked interest rates up and had to crush inflation. So they hit a really bad time in the economy. The Carter years and Reagan years, the early Reagan years, Volcker under Reagan crushed with the rates inflation. House prices, even though interest rates were 18%, 16%, house prices went up because of demographics, even though housing affordability during those years are worse than today. So that's why I don't see that the house price is changing right now. What we would need a lot more supply. When this first started happening, I felt like, oh my gosh, we're in a housing bubble. And I predicted, and I was wrong, that we would see about a 20% drop in value. And I didn't think we would go down to like the 30-40% overvalue that we kind of compare to what it should be, based on income. But we're not gonna. It is going to balance out, but it's not going to balance out where that price drops. What'll happen is affordability will get better through a couple ways. Incomes will rise with inflation, and rates will dip down a little bit. So the two will kind of converge over time, but it's going to take years, 4, 5, 10 years tops. So that's where we're going to see affordability get better, but the actual prices I don't think are going to drop. They may drop in a couple markets. There's a couple instances where people report there's a 20% drop in a market, but those are price reductions. That's not an actual median sale price drop. So those are skewed numbers. So you got to be careful with what you're hearing out there. There's a lot of doomers out there posting sensational stats. I'd love to see housing get super cheap and I'd sell 100 houses instead of 2. I'd make more money. But that's just the materials to build a house are too expensive. The labor to build a house are too expensive. The regulations, the red tape, the permitting fees, you pay 50, 60 grand just to get a permit to build a house. That's not going to change. I mean, it'd be nice if you could and just say, hey, we need housing. We're not going to charge you this ridiculous fee to provide housing. But no, they got to get their pound of flesh. So those costs aren't going down. I wish they would. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. And that's inflation. And we're in that inflationary period. I do think we're going to see inflation going forward, but I don't think it's going to be from the tariffs. I think it's just going to be from we have a crisis on our hands with the federal spending. We have a huge amount of debt that's financed at like 2%. I think it's like 60% of our debt or something crazy. 70% of our debt is financed at 2% short term. And that all resets this year. So we're going to go from like a 2% rate to like a 7% rate or whatever they refinance it at. And that's why Trump's trying to get that rate down, is so it's not as big a hit to the system. And then also increase revenue through tariffs to kind of cover that spread. It's like if you had your credit card, there's two ways to do it: is get your credit card interest rate down and increase your revenue. Right. Those are the only two ways to get out of that predicament. And that's a predicament that this country's in right now. And there's going to be some pains that go with it. But if it is pulled off successfully, I think we're going to hit some of the best times this country's ever seen for growth. If we can start producing again, rather than we kind of became a parasitic culture, right? We would outsource everything, would buy companies and rip them apart, sell off the assets, right? That was kind of that boomer generation. It was the robber baron takeover and hostile takeover on a company by, with the junk bonds kind of thing, and strip it of all its assets and sell off the parts. And, they would make money that way rather than creating things. I think we're going to go back to where we have to create things. And I think this is an awesome time to be younger. I wish I was younger to have this opportunity to go forward. You have some of the best tools out there, right? All this computer technology is just a tool, right? You have artificial intelligence coming in. It's a tool to multiply your efforts, right? And then if you get some robotics, I'll get an army of robots, right, to build a house. Maybe that could drive the labor out, but it's a great time to be creative and create something and build something. We're a nation that thrive from building something. We create. So to be young and see opportunities to create things. So trying to look at opportunities rather than housing bubble. Look for how can I make money? How can I provide services? How can I create something? We just discussed the boomers in need of all these goods and services now that they're retired, and they're going to have limited physical capability in the coming years to do that. Here's your opportunity to provide a service and, compound on it, spread it out, just be the first to the table and be the best to serve that. So I think that's where millennials, and I guess it's Gen Y, not Gen Z, can provide. They've got a bigger demographic, and they're sitting on a golden opportunity here to provide that. My generation stuck between the millennials and the boomers, and we're kind of getting old and tired, and we were kind of jackasses to begin with, so we're not going to be much help in this. But to be younger and see these opportunities would be really exciting. So Robert writes, house building in rural Oklahoma is 188 square foot, minimum 2,200 square feet from the last time I checked. Now with tariffs. Okay. So Robert, there was some of the builders posted what they were experiencing on the tariffs. I think it was DR Horton said that they're not seeing any price increases from tariffs this year. And then they were expecting, it was Lennar or DR Horton or one of the bigger builders was expecting to see maybe 3% increase on house prices next year from tariffs. So when you ship a container in of, goods and services, it sounds like, oh my gosh, it's, you're going to pay this big fee, but you're sending in such volume. And then when you break it into a house, the components that are actually going into the house aren't that big a deal. The Canadian tariffs with the lumber, the lumber is still, it's a big bill on a house, but it's not the biggest bill, right? Your windows exceed your lumber, your timber on that. So the windows is a bigger bill. The roofing's a bigger bill. So those components, it's not going to amount to as much as everyone feared. So I wouldn't get too worried about that. That's all going to balance out. So the tariffs, what's going to happen? If Trump really believed in tariffs, and I steal this from Logan Mohtashami, he would just say, "There's no negotiation. Boom, here's 100% tariff or 20% tariff, whatever the number is." And say that's not. He's saying you have whatever 50% tariff. We're going to match your tariff, and we'll charge you 50% as well. That's all these tariffs are. So, and then they'll fight back and say, "Well, we're going to go to 60%." And he goes, "Okay, we're 60%." So the tariffs is just it's a dance. It's going to get resolved. It seems scary right now, I know, but it's not going to amount to much. And then let's see, Robert, 3D printing houses so far haven't reached out there. Yes, because and they won't. And here's why. The I just mentioned the lumber, the 2x4s, the sticks and bricks, right? The 2x6 exterior walls. You can't use 2x4s anymore because that's just not energy efficient enough. You got to go to a 2x6 so you can get extra insulation in there, and then you got to go to the low E argon glass, thermal paints, so you don't lose as much heat. So everything we're doing is adding money to the house for energy efficiency, that kind of stuff. And what we do is we seal the house so tight that then we get mold problems. So that's another topic. But what 3D printing does is it replaces all the 2x6s and 2x4 interior walls, and it just creates the shell. It doesn't create the roof, doesn't create the glass windows, doesn't create the electrical wires, it doesn't create the plumbing, it doesn't create the expensive part of the house. The electrical, the plumbing, the windows, the roof, the foundation, it's creating the shell. That's it. So you're just replacing the sticks and bricks. You're not replacing any of the expensive components, not the carpeting, not the cabinets, not the appliances. That stuff can't be printed. That's why 3D printing is really not going to have that big an impact, because it's just replacing the lumber. Now, maybe if tariffs did get way out of control and we couldn't log our own lumber here, which we got a ton of lumber here, maybe then it becomes cost efficient. But I wouldn't put your hopes into 3D printing, because that's just the shell. It's not the interior components where the real costs are. Let's see, Monkey Man, construction supply houses in my area had 30% markup. Yeah, that's probably about right. So we kind of use the rule of thumb. If you're a builder, you'd want to target like a 20% profit, and you'd be lucky to make 10%, right? Because cost overruns, you have bad weather, you have mishaps on the job, windows get broken, maybe a vandalism, or someone rams a 2x4 through a window accidentally, while they're on the job site. That kind of stuff happens, and that chews away at the profit. But usually the builders will try to target 20%. I could see where if you're in a hot market, the builder's going to shoot up to try to get 30 if they can get it. I know like flippers will kind of target that 30% mark. So, and how they do that is that that has to hold their holding costs. That may be where you're getting the 30%, is that holding cost is built into that. So there may be more like 20% with 10% holding costs and expenses. But yeah, their interest ticking away while they build it, that chews into the cost of house. The interest rate, if we go up to a higher interest rates cost more to build the house now, because that money costs more as you sit on it. So all these components add into houses. If you want to build a cheap house, back to that 3D printing, one of the most cost-effective houses is a split entry. And I know architects absolutely hate the split entry, and I don't really care for them either, because when you walk in, you either go up or down, right? But what they've done is they've gone down, and this is my area, right? Because we got to go down 42 inches to get below frost level. So that's why we have basements in Minnesota, is because our frost actually goes down. I mean, some winters we've had it go down like 50 inches, 52 inches. So that ground freezes there, and it lifts the building up and down. And so that's why they want the footings down below the frost level. And typically you can get down around 42 inches, and that's code. So as long as you're going down 42 inches, it's not that much more to throw a few more courses of block in and get a full basement. That's why we have basements in Minnesota. But the split entry, what it does is it lifts half that basement up. So you're at the 42 inches, and then you only have a half a basement wall. So the other half of the basement wall, you get daylight windows in that you can open and climb out of. Well, that feels like a livable space. Now you're not in a cellar, you're not in a dungeon, and you can put bedrooms, a living room down there. Some people turn it into split entry, or a duplex, right? Put another whole living level down there. And cost effective because you've reduced the amount of concrete blocks or poured concrete, right? You've stacked livable space, and you have a smaller roof containing over a small footprint. That's the most efficient design. A square box is the most efficient design. The more angles you start cutting into, the more expensive it gets, the more labor intensive it gets. And then architects, I follow some architects online, and they say, oh, architecture is so ugly today, and why don't we build like we did in the 1920s? I said, building codes. They don't like me. But it's keeping it simple design, simple construction. It's not the most pretty, but it is the most efficient. And when we need efficient housing, that's what we go to. The problem with split entries is that we get older and we age, back to the boomers, our knees aren't as good, and we carry the groceries up a half a flight of stairs or down a flight of stairs if it's a duplex. If you go into like the inner ring suburbs, like first tier suburbs, like the 50s built, maybe some of the early 60s built, there's garden apartments. And garden apartments, you go in and half a flight down, there's garden level apartments. Half a flight up is a first level, and there's another flight up, and that's third level. No elevator, right? And those were super efficient, easy to build, cost affordable housing. Well, guess what? They're illegal. You can't build them anymore. America with Disabilities Act has outlawed those because there's no elevator in them. Okay, so now you can't build these small, efficient apartment buildings that you can have all these small investors come into an area and build cheap, affordable housing. Because now you have to build 50, 100, 200 units with elevators to service that many. You can't amortize an elevator shaft at $250,000 or whatever that shaft is going to run over 12 apartments. You're going to have to spread it out over much more apartments to get those costs down. So with these American with Disabilities Act is well intended, but it adds tremendously to the cost of housing. We want to save energy. So let's go to 2x6 walls so we can get R30 insulation in there, and then we'll put a vapor barrier on there, then we'll seal around all the outlets so there's no air leak. Yeah, that's a good idea. So you can cut your gas bill down from $120 a month to $100. Okay. But you added a tremendous amount to the cost of construction. Okay. But now we need GFI outlets in all the bathrooms because, if you drop a hairdryer in the bathtub, it could electrocute yourself. Okay. So that's safety. Okay. Well, let's add them to the kitchen too because you're around water source. So anywhere near water, we're going to add GFI outlets. Oh, now let's add arc fault outlets. Okay. So now we got a minimum number of circuits in the house. We're going to have a minimum number, all under the disguise of being safe, but it adds tremendous cost to the housing. So this stuff just kind of multiplies on itself. And you can't go into a house and say, it's the one item that made housing costs expensive. It's been a slow bleed since the 60s. So a lot of our problems came out of the 60s. I blame the hippies, the boomers. That's just me. Okay, Monkey Man, those damn cripples ruin all our fun. Yes. That's funny. So that's kind of where we are with housing. I don't think we're going to see a price drop in housing. In fact, I think what we're going to see is house prices are going to continue to pace inflation. I think we're going to see more inflation. And with high interest rates right now, construction has slowed way down, right? Builders aren't pulling those permits to build new housing. Why? Because the holding costs, we talked about that 30% margin, 10% of its holding costs is too expensive, and they're uncertain about the buyer demand with high rates. So they're not adding more supply in. So the longer we sit here not adding supply, the worse the housing inventory is going to get. So right now we have got kind of a short window opening on less buyers out there. Get into the market, go get something while you can, because if rates drop below 6, it's probably going to be a feeding frenzy again, and we're going to see multiple offers. All right, I can't read that one out loud, Monkey Man, but I'll let people read it. Brilliant idea. I think there was an ad on against Republicans pushing Granny off the cliff, right? It was his grandma in a wheelchair, and Republicans are going to push your grandma off a cliff, and then they show grandma going over the cliff in a wheelchair. So anyhow, that's kind of where we're at with the house prices. And I don't think boomers are going to sell their houses. There's nothing for them to buy. Where are they going to go? Let's say you're 65, 75. You're in that age bracket. You're retired. You spend all you want on whatever. You have 75% of the, or 50% of the wealth in this country. This is legendary. Hey, Aaron. I can send you a link. Do you want to jump on? So if they own 70% of the wealth or 50% of the wealth, and you're in that demographic, what are you going to do? Are you going to sell your 3% mortgage house to go buy a townhouse with association dues and now pay 7%, triple your house payment? If you have a house payment at that point, I don't think so. I think you're going to stay put, or the vast majority of them are. So a lot of them, I think, are going to die in place. I don't see them as very rational thinkers. They are going to, they're never going to grow up, right? That's kind of that generation. And, right, fine, right? They're going to go out and have fun, and they're going to do the things that they wanted to do. They'll get their fancy cars and drag race, that kind of stuff. Okay. Now I got to show off him. Now I'm going to see The Accountant 2. Is that a movie? Plus, I'm way more legendary than him, and that'd be intimidating. Thanks. So I just don't think the boomers are going to sell en masse. They won't. They'll slowly die off and trickle off. A few of them might, but not enough to really put a dent in the housing market. Most of them are going to be stuck in place. And actually, a lot of them don't have the wealth. It's concentrated. It's not evenly distributed amongst the whole demographic. The Accountant, a story loosely based on Aaron's life. Oh, this is actually a movie? I never heard of this. Where do you hear about movies nowadays? Robert asks, too bad we can't build flop houses anymore. 600 to 800 square feet, 2-bedroom would fix the housing crisis. Yes, you can't because of Karen. So if you go to apply for a building permit, or you want to develop a piece of land in, let's say, any suburb, you have to bring your plan before the planning commission. Or actually, you start with the city planners and say, does this meet all the guidelines? And they'll pull out their big book and they'll read, nope, you got to have a 15-foot setback from the side lot. You can only go X amount of units per acre. Calculate out the wetlands. You need, no more than X amount impervious surface, so the rainwater can trickle through. It just on and on, all these regulations. And they've pretty much pre-designed what kind of housing is going to go in the city. So then you say, okay, well, maybe I can tweak it a little bit and squeeze enough units in there to try to squeak out a profit, right? Because my costs are going up, and then I got to pay for all the design, right? I got to spend whatever $300,000 for this townhouse complex on designs, architectures, and then I'm going to have to go through the approval process. So I'll go in front of planning commission. Planning commission will say, well, I don't know what shade of black are you using on the trim. That's a true story, by the way. The project got turned down because they didn't like the shade of black. So back to the drawing board, pay the application fee again, start all over, right? That's what builders have. That's the hurdle to provide the housing the market needs. It's not the developers. It's not the builders. It's the government. It's the regulations. It's red tape. So they prevent housing from coming to the market. And it's because Karen doesn't want that next door to her. She wants to control what gets built in the area. I'm using Karen as a symbolic. So that's the main reason why we can't have those kind of housings. But you're right. I mean, if you look at it, you're using common sense, Robert. You're going to say, I just need to build 600 to 800 square foot houses. Exactly what they did in the 1920s. You drive around the neighborhoods and, in the city where they were built during the 20s, they're 600 to 800 square feet with an expansion attic so they could grow into it when they could afford it. That's how we had the American dream. But we don't allow that anymore because NIMBYs, not in my backyard, they need to protect their house values and not allow these smaller riffraff into the area. We need these bigger houses so our values go up. And that's kind of the crux of it. So then they'll say, well, we do need that housing, so therefore we'll take this area of land and you can go high density housing. We need urbanism, right? So build these big apartment buildings near the high traffic areas so they're out of our nice neighborhood and then not our problem. So that's kind of, I think this younger generation's got to go in there and run for these council positions, city council and planning commission seats, and just take over. You guys have the numbers, Gen Y and millennials. Just take over and grab the bull by the horns and say, no, we need affordable housing. We're getting rid of these stupid zoning regulations. We need to allow builders to build affordable housing. But you can't because all these regulations make starter homes illegal. Truly illegal. You can't build them. All right, back to Aaron. Let me catch up on these texts. The Accountant is a story loosely based on Aaron's life. I'm going to take that as sarcasm. It's about an autistic accountant assassin, approximately. Is this for real or are you making this up? I think he's making this up. Now we got 3 conversations going on here. It's hard to keep up. So, where was I? We talked about flop houses, and they're not flop houses. They're that 1920s craftsman bungalow. Gorgeous houses. I mean, so much character. I love those houses. Those are my favorite houses. They were just built, very efficient floor plans, small square footage, everything you needed contained in a small square footage. No, he says it's real. If Aaron says it's real, it's real. So do they have movie theaters anymore? I got to look this up. The Accountant 2 movie. Oh my God, it is real. I thought you were kidding. Ben Affleck. That's why I never heard of it. Affleck. Did you ever see the movie The Ringer? Affleck. It's real. First movie on Amazon Prime. See, I don't have Amazon Prime. I'm old. I use the little rabbit ears to get my television. I don't pay for television. I bought a Roku TV and I can't find a TV station on there. I'm able to get MacGyver, not MacGyver, the other TV show, Hogan's Heroes and Rockford Files. I can get that channel in, and that's all I can watch. So I watch Hogan's Heroes and Rockford Files. That's it. What else does a guy need? Apparently The Accountant too. So are you going to do a review on this, Aaron? Apparently not. All right. So to recap, what do we have? We have an aging population that controls all the wealth in this country. And the younger generation's objective is to provide the goods and services to acquire all that wealth in the best way they can. Yes, Robert, Rockford Files is peak TV. That was the 70s were peak of civilization. It was all downhill from there. 1971. WTF happened in 1971. So acquire all the wealth you can from this generation. Figure out what they need. Provide the services to them. They're going to need the handyman. They're going to need people to take care of their house. They're going to need those solutions as they age. And yeah, back to was that you, Monkey Man, who brought that up, or Robert? They will age out of their house at some point. And here's a strategy for you. Okay, I didn't even think about this, but now that you brought it up, so you're going to have a certain percentage of the population that are aging and they can't keep up with the maintenance, and they're going to end up with kind of a beat up old house, right? It's deferred maintenance, needs a lot of work. They need to get the cash out of there, but they can't fix it up to sell to get into the next place, or their kids inherit it and just want to sell it. So you can buy those at the proper price to get your 20% margin or 30% margin withholding costs in there and fix it up and sell it or turn it into rentals. So that is a strategy as these people do age, because they're going to want to hit the easy button. They're not going to want to do the work, or they won't be able to do the work. So there is opportunity there in their housing. Boomers aged in as what happened. Boomer Karen was 20 years old. Not sure what you mean there, Robert. Karen is now an old boomer running the city planning commission and not allowing affordable housing to be built. But she started out a young 20 hippie that thought she was going to save the world. Is that what I read into that one? Probably spot on. 1971 is not old. That's a vintage year. That's my year. Gen X. You got to be post 66. I think 66 and older is a boomer. So, any questions before I sign off for the evening? I think Aaron left for the movie. Oh, Rockford Files was 71. You're right. All right. Well, I'm signing off. I think I've kind of run full circle on that one. That's my theory, that we're not going to go into a recession because the boomers have all the wealth, unless they stop spending for some reason. And that's because you're not providing them with what they want to spend money on. All right. Signing off. Have a good night.